How are Chinese citizens ending up on the front lines of Russia's war in Ukraine? Why are the Russian planes falling from the sky, and what do Western sanctions have to do with it? And what has Friedrich Merz, Germany's next chancellor, promised Ukraine? Time to break down the latest headlines with the gaze. But first, don't forget to follow our website, YouTube, and socials for more sharp takes and global updates. What would you do if you were promised a legal job abroad and ended up on the front lines of someone else's war? That's exactly what happened to a group of Chinese citizens now held as prisoners of war in Ukraine. Lured by fake job offers and manipulated by online propaganda, they found themselves trapped in Russia's military machine. From forced labor and withheld pay to threats and abuse, their stories reveal a dark side of Moscow's international recruitment. Let's dive in.
Chinese citizens are deceived into joining the Russian army. This was revealed by Chinese prisoners of war at a press conference in Kiev. They were captured by Ukrainian forces in early April in the Donetsk region. According to the prisoners, they came to Russia believing promises of legal work. One expected to assist in rehabilitating the wounded but was sent to the front instead.
When I spoke with the recruiter, we discussed rehabilitating the wounded, of which there are many in the Russian army. That's the job I came to do. When I arrived in Moscow, registration began, and I could no longer do anything. There was no chance to escape. They escorted us even to the bathroom. I know there was a suicide attempt in Rostov. Probably an Arab took his own life, but I don't know why. We lived in filth, with no water or electricity, fed once a day, a handful of rice as a reward. They forced us to do hard labor. Real war is different from movies or TV. I want to apologize to my parents. My only wish is to return home.
In Russia, Chinese citizens get no interpreters. All documentation and communication are in Russian. The Chinese prisoners said they had to use gestures. Although they were given cards for personal expenses, they couldn't use them. Russian soldiers took them for fuel and charging stations. A prisoner, Zhang Renbo, said an instructor in the training camp took his phone and demanded a bribe to make a call.
They first offer a different job, like being a builder. They promise one thing, then it changes. On the first day in the training camp, they took my phone. The next day, the instructor said it was his, and I'd have to pay to use it. When I asked how much, he showed his palms 3 times, and I paid 15,000 rubles. Refused to pay, and they'd threatened to send you to the front line. I regret coming here. I gained nothing. I hope to contact my family through TV.
Reuters reports about 200 Chinese citizens may be in the Russian army, lured to fight in Russia's war against Ukraine via online platforms. Chinese prisoners said bloggers are used and social media ads promise legal work and high pay.
On Chinese social media like TikTok, you see people in uniforms. In China, being in the army is prestigious, but not everyone gets the chance. So, some are tempted to join elsewhere if they can't serve in China.
Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko denies Chinese citizens are in the Russian army, saying they're not there. Kremlin propagandists echo this. But Chinese prisoners are proof otherwise. They want to go home and are ready for exchange with Ukrainian soldiers. They say Russian propaganda enabled Chinese involvement in the war.
China promotes friendliness toward Russia. This propaganda may encourage trust in Russia and participation. Before coming to Ukraine, all war-related information was about Russia's victories, how Russia captured one thing, then another.
That's how the information is framed. China's foreign ministry denies its citizens are involved in Russia's war against Ukraine, saying the government urges citizens to stay far from conflict zones and avoid participation. Yet Reuters reported Chinese officers in Russia's rear are studying modern warfare tactics. Nikita Skoblikov for the Gaze Media.
Russia's war machine may be loud, but its engine is running low on fuel. British intelligence warns that Moscow's financial reserves are shrinking, inflation is climbing, and sanctions are finally biting into the heart of its military spending. Civilian industries aren't doing any better. Food production is down, beverage output collapses, and Russian citizens are feeling the sting with falling wages and job losses. And there's more. Dozens of Russian planes have been grounded. Spare parts are running out, and accidents are piling up. While Moscow keeps talking about strength, its economy is whispering collapse. How long can the Kremlin really afford this war? Let's take a closer look.
Inflation in Russia continues to rise while revenues from oil and gas are declining, and this is weakening the Kremlin's ability to sustain high defense spending. That's according to British intelligence. In its latest report, it notes that interest rates remain high and that the number of corporate bankruptcies in Russia is likely to increase.
Labor shortages, alongside high levels of government spending, almost certainly mean inflation will remain above the CBR's target of 4% through 2025. Long-term inflationary pressure will highly likely exacerbate pressures on Russia's ability to sustain high defense spending. From the UK Ministry of Defense report on X social network.
Russia's federal spending in April surged by 83%. The government is now tapping into its crisis reserves to finance the war in Ukraine. Interest rates have reached 21%, the highest in the last 2 decades, compared to a pre-war rate of 8.5% in January 2022. This had triggered record inflation since the start of the full-scale invasion. Industries such as automotive manufacturing, rail, and agricultural machinery construction have been hit hardest by high central bank rates and shrinking demand. Russians are now facing a rise in unemployment and falling wages.
The consumer sector and several key civilian industries are currently under serious strain. Clothing and footwear factories, once seen as potential leaders in import substitution after the exit of Western brands, saw a 0.5% drop in February and a 1.8% drop over the first 2 months of the year. Food production declined by 3% and beverage output plummeted by 11.3%. From the Insider article.
Russia's economy has entered a state of stagnation. Billions of dollars have already been spent on war. Diplomatic channels between Moscow and Washington have hit a dead end, with Russia treating negotiations solely as a means to ease sanctions. Imports of sanctioned goods have dropped significantly. In some categories, such as electronics used in the military-industrial complex, imports have fallen by a factor of 10. In 2024, imports of the US, EU, Japanese, and South Korean-made electronic components from China dropped 70-fold after increasing 60-fold between 2020 and 2023. Sanctions are taking their toll on the economy, and this in turn affects the Kremlin's ability to fund the war.
No matter how much Putin and his allies deny it, sanctions clearly do matter to them. It comes up in every single negotiation, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. For example, there was this unexpected issue with airplane spare parts, the ones they essentially stole at one point.
The US, EU, and other countries have banned the export of aircraft parts and new plans to Russia. Boeing and Airbus have ceased all technical support. Within a year, Russian airlines lost nearly 60 aircraft due to maintenance and repair problems. That's according to Dmitry Yadrov, the head of the Federal Air Transport Agency of Russia. He stated that some planes are decommissioned after incidents, while others are grounded due to lack of parts. With the holiday season approaching, Russia simply doesn't have enough aircraft.
According to Rosaviatsia, 1,138 airplanes and 920 helicopters are currently in operation, but concern is growing. Sergei Chemezov, the head of the Rostec Corporation, has warned that over the coming years, Russian airlines could lose at least 200 foreign-made aircraft, possibly many more. Boeing and Airbus planes make up about 700 units in Russia's fleet and account for up to 90% of all passenger traffic in the country. From the Moscow Times article.
According to estimates from Novaya Gazeta Europe, Russia recorded 208 aviation incidents in just the first 11 months of 2024, a 25% increase compared to the same period in the previous year. In nearly half of those cases, engine failures or landing gear malfunctions were cited as the cause. Since the start of this year alone, there have been at least 10 emergency landings involving Russian carriers due to technical issues mid-flight. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavec, Victoria Smirnova, UATV News.
Germany has emerged as Ukraine's strongest European partner, and now a leadership shift could push that support even further. Friedrich Merz, poised to become Germany's next chancellor, has criticized Berlin's past hesitations and made some bold promises, from sending long-range missiles to pushing back against Trump's tariffs. But will it follow through? And how might his vision reshape both German and EU policy toward Ukraine? We're about to find out.
Russia's war against Ukraine won't end on its own, and for it to end sooner, we must step up our support for Kyiv. That's according to Friedrich Merz, the leader of the Christian Democratic Union who could become Chancellor of Germany following coalition talks. Merz has repeatedly criticized the former government for not doing enough to help Ukraine and has pledged, if elected, to supply Taurus missiles to Kyiv. In his view, Europe's security is directly tied to Ukraine's security.
We must defend our freedom. And that freedom doesn't end at Ukraine's territorial borders. It's the freedom to live as we choose. It's our democracy that we must better protect. In the coming years, we will undoubtedly have to do much more to preserve it.
Defense and security have become central themes in Merz's political messaging, once he emphasized heavily during recent Bundestag elections. As the leader of the Christian Democratic Union, he is pushing to lift Germany's debt ceiling to fund a $1 billion package aimed at modernizing the country's infrastructure and armed forces. Merz also plans to maintain military service as a voluntary commitment.
In our coalition agreement, we decided to model our military registration system on the Swedish example, starting on a voluntary basis, possibly even on a larger scale. The Bundeswehr is facing serious personnel shortages, and I don't rule out the possibility that we may eventually return to mandatory military service.
Merz's positions are likely to shape the makeup and policy direction of Germany's next government. Coalition talks between the Christian Democratic Union and the Social Democratic Party are ongoing. According to media reports, Boris Pistorius may remain as a Federal Minister of Defense of Germany. He shares Merz's views on army reform, increased defense spending, and stronger support for Ukraine.
For me, it's absolutely clear that we still need a militarily strong Ukraine, and that Ukraine needs our support. Only then can we create a pathway to peace. Given the current situation, we must demonstrate our capability. That depends on whether we can become a force of deterrence and defense. We will be spending vast sums. That alone is already a historic shift. And we will ensure that this money is spent quickly, efficiently, and wisely.
Germany also faces an economic threat after Donald Trump imposed a 20% tariff on EU goods, in addition to previously 25% tariffs on European steel and aluminium. German businesses began to feel the pinch. Merz has promised to work with the EU to pressure Washington to lift these tariffs. He says the new German government will focus on improving the country's investments climate.
I want to be the one who, together with France, Poland, and many other EU members, reestablishes a common European policy. And if we succeed, if we create stable investment conditions, reliability, consistency, and stop the infighting, then Europe and Germany will once again become attractive places for investment, innovation, and digitalization. We have tremendous potential, and in this new coalition, we intend to make full use of it.
Merz says Europe must push back firmly against Trump on trade. Still, he believes the EU and the US will ultimately need to agree on a zero-tariff trade deal. He made these remarks in an interview with Handelsblatt. A similar proposal has previously come from the EU, but Trump rejected it, saying that for the deal to be balanced, Europe would have to purchase more American energy. If the standard with the US isn't resolved soon, Merz warned Europe will have no choice but to shift focus on alternative markets. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavets and Reed Matrenko, UATV News.
So, we've just uncovered how Chinese citizens were tricked into fighting Russia's war, how sanctions are grounding its economy, and what Germany's next leader could mean for Ukraine and the West. What do you think? Will Merz deliver on his promises? And is Russia's war machine finally starting to break down? Share your thoughts in the comments. And stay tuned for more with The Gaze.